Section 1. The Streets of Aurelia. Picture this: you are walking down the marble-paved streets of Aurelia, the beating heart of the Eastern Empire, in the year 152 AD. Traders shout over the din of the marketplace, selling figs from Lycia, silks from the Far East, and spices sharp enough to sting the air. The scent of roasted lamb mingles with incense drifting from the temples. You turn the corner into the Grand Forum, where senators in white togas murmur in the shade of towering columns. But someone, makes the crowd's chatter falter. Marching down the main thoroughfare is the emperor himself, Cassian Aurelius, surrounded by his elite guard in bronze armor polished to a mirror's gleam. At his side walks a figure so striking that heads turn, conversations die mid-sentence, and even the vendors fall silent. She, at least she appears to be a she, is tall, with hair like molten gold tumbling over her shoulders. Jewels gleam at her throat and wrists, and her gown of Tyrian purple glitters with threads of gold. The sun catches her features, high cheekbones, a delicate mouth, and eyes so vividly green they seem almost unreal. But among the crowd, whispers bloom like wildfire. The figure's beauty is unquestionable, but so is the truth that every courtier knows and no one dares say aloud. The woman, walking beside the emperor, was once a young man named Lucan. And what Cassian did to him, what he forced him to become, is a tale so disturbing, so tangled in power and obsession, that it still circulates in hushed tones among palace servants decades later. Before we arrive at that moment, before Lucan became Livia, the empress in name only, we must begin with the man who engineered this transformation. Cassian Aurelius had not been born a monster. In his youth, he was the darling of the Senate, the hope of a new age. At 24, he inherited the throne after his father's sudden death. Handsome, eloquent, and known for his generosity, Cassian's early reign was a beacon of prosperity. He lowered grain prices, commissioned new aqueducts, and staged games for the public that left even the most cynical senators impressed. But absolute power seeps into the soul like poison. And in Cassian's case, the venom took root the moment he lost the woman he adored more than life itself. Section 2. The Emperor's Jewel. Her name was Valeria Marcelline. Daughter of a provincial governor, she had arrived in Aurelia at 17, her family eager to arrange a politically advantageous marriage. But from the moment Cassian saw her at a midsummer banquet in the Lantern Court, politics ceased to matter. He watched her move through the crowd with unhurried grace, her laughter drawing glances as surely as a torch draws moths. She had a way of meeting a man's eyes, not coyly, but as though she were weighing his soul, and when her gaze fell upon Cassian, he felt the breath leave his chest. Their courtship was scandalous in its speed. By winter, Valeria had replaced all other concerns in the emperor's mind. He brought her to council meetings, asked her opinion on state affairs, and placed her beside him at every public appearance. Senators grumbled, generals rolled their eyes. But the people adored her. Valeria was no silent ornament. She debated Cassian in the open, challenged his policies with sharp wit, and urged him to think of the empire's poorest citizens. Sometimes they argued for hours, but when the council doors closed, the tension between them always dissolved into laughter, or into long evenings behind locked chambers. For 5 years, theirs was a marriage of rare devotion. And when she carried his child, the city celebrated with festivals and processions. But fate is a cruel craftsman. One late spring afternoon, as the scent of orange blossoms floated over the palace gardens, a quarrel erupted. No one remembers the cause. Some say it was over Cassian's absence from the birth preparations, others whisper that Valeria mocked his poetry recitals. What is certain is this: the words grew heated, Cassian's voice rose, and in a moment of blind rage he struck her. She fell against the marble balustrade, clutching her abdomen. The look in her eyes, shock, betrayal, pain, would haunt him forever. Section 3. The Shattering. The palace healers came running at once, their sandals slapping against the mosaic floors. Cassian, pale and trembling, knelt beside Valeria, murmuring, "Stay with me, gods, please stay." His hands hovered over her, useless, as if he could will the life back into her body. Her lips parted, but no words came. A single tear slid down her cheek before her eyes fluttered shut. The healers worked for hours, ordering hot cloths, herbal tinctures, and charms against evil spirits. Cassian paced like a madman, bursting into the chamber every few minutes to demand progress. But the truth hung heavy in the air. The blow had been too severe, the damage inside irreparable. By nightfall, Valeria was gone, along with their unborn child. Cassian refused to believe it. He shook her shoulders, called her name again and again, his voice cracking. "Wake up. You can't leave me. You're mine." When no miracle came, the emperor, ruler of an empire stretching from the iron hills to the deserts of Syria, collapsed onto the floor and wept like a child. The funeral rites should have followed swiftly, as custom demanded, but Cassian would not permit it. He had her body embalmed, wrapped in silks, and placed in a private marble chamber lined with lamps. Day after day, he visited, speaking to her as though she were still alive. Servants heard him recount their shared memories, sometimes laughing softly, other times raging at her for abandoning him. Weeks became months. His council began to avoid him, alarmed by his detachment from governance. Decisions stalled. Petitions went unanswered. When a senator suggested the emperor needed closure, Cassian had him exiled to the northern frontiers without trial. In the heart of his grief, an idea began to coil like a serpent. If the gods had taken Valeria, perhaps he could bring her back. Section 4. The first glimpse of Lucan. It happened on a rain-slick morning in early autumn. Cassian was returning from the temple of Ascleon, where he had offered a fortune in gold for the god to restore Valeria. The priests had mumbled their blessings, but the hollowness in their eyes told him they did not believe. As his procession wound through the palace's inner courtyard, Cassian's gaze caught on a group of young scribes hurrying beneath the colonnade to avoid the drizzle. One of them, a boy, no more than 15, looked up, startled by the sudden appearance of the emperor. Cassian's heart jolted. The boy's features, sharp yet delicate, with an almost luminous pallor, were eerily familiar. His hair, damp from the rain, clung in curls around a face framed by high cheekbones and a straight, fine nose. But it was the eyes that struck him, deep green, ringed with gold, the exact shade that had once stared at him across candlelit banquets. Cassian slowed his step, his gaze fixed on the boy until the rest of the courtyard seemed to dissolve into mist. "What is his name?" he asked, his voice low. The captain of the guard, caught off guard by the question, glanced over. "That is Lucan, Majesty. A freedman's son. He serves as a junior archivist in the Imperial Library." Lucan, realizing he was being studied, dropped to one knee and bowed his head. Rain pooled in the folds of his simple wool tunic. Cassian approached slowly, like a man approaching a vision he feared might vanish. "Raise your head," he commanded. Lucan obeyed. For the briefest moment, those green-gold eyes met his, and Cassian saw Valeria, not as she had been in death, but in the full bloom of life. A thought, impossible yet undeniable, bloomed in the Emperor's mind. I could see her again. I could have her again. Section 5. The Seed of Obsession. Cassian summoned Lucan to his private audience chamber that same evening. The boy entered hesitantly, clearly bewildered by the summons. The chamber was dim, lit only by braziers and a scattering of oil lamps. Valeria's portraits, scores of them, lined the walls. Her likeness gazed down from every angle, smiling, solemn, regal, playful. It was like stepping into a shrine. "Lucan," Cassian said, gesturing for him to come closer. "Do you know why you are here?" "No, Majesty," Lucan replied, his voice careful but steady. The Emperor rose from his seat. In the flickering light, his eyes were fever-bright. He circled the boy like a collector appraising a rare artifact. "You have a face," Cassian murmured, "that the gods themselves must have shaped. Has anyone ever told you so?" Lucan flushed, unsure if this was praise or a trap. My mother said I favored her side of the family." Cassian stopped in front of him. "You favor someone else. Someone who was dearer to me than life. I lost her, and the world has been a tomb ever since." He stepped closer, so close that Lucan could smell the faint mix of wine and incense on his breath. But perhaps the gods have returned her to me, in you. Lucan's pulse quickened. Majesty, I'm only. A raised hand silenced him. From this day forward, you will no longer work in the library. You will live in the eastern wing of the palace. You will be clothed, fed, and attended by the best my court can offer. In return, you will obey me in all things. Lucan swallowed hard. And if I refuse? Cassian's expression did not change, but his voice dropped to something cold and absolute. You won't. Section 6, The First Changes. The next morning, Lucan's old life vanished like breath on glass. His modest quarters in the scribe's hall were stripped bare. His scrolls and writing tools vanished into the archives. 2 guards appeared at dawn, not to arrest him, but to escort him to the eastern wing of the palace, a place reserved for honored guests, and the emperor's inner circle. The rooms he entered were nothing like the plain stone chambers he knew. Here, the floors were veined marble, the walls painted with delicate frescoes of gardens and mythic lovers. Thick curtains filtered the sunlight into a soft, golden haze. A trio of attendants awaited him. The eldest, a woman named Serapha, greeted him with a bow and an appraising gaze. His Imperial Majesty has given us instructions, she said. We are to see to your grooming, your clothing, and your instruction. Lucan frowned. Instruction? You will learn posture, speech, deportment, how to carry yourself as one of noble blood. The Emperor wishes it so. Before Lucan could protest, Serapha clapped her hands. 2 younger attendants moved forward, carrying lengths of fabric in colors he had never worn, pale rose, deep amethyst, shimmering ivory. They held them against him, murmuring about which shades flattered his complexion. Lucan's tunic was taken, replaced by a long robe of soft linen that brushed his ankles. A belt of gold thread cinched his waist. The effect was subtle, but enough to alter the way he stood, the way he moved. A barber arrived to tend his hair, combing it into longer waves and trimming the edges with precise care. Oils scented with jasmine were worked into the strands until they shone in the lamplight. Lucan stared into the bronze mirror they held before him. The boy who had copied ledgers in the library was already fading. That evening Cassian visited. His eyes swept over Lucan, lingering with approval. Better, he murmured. But this is only the beginning. Section 7, The Walls Close In. Within a week, Lucan no longer saw the library, the marketplace, or even the outer courtyards. His world had shrunk to a series of gilded rooms, perfumed corridors, and the presence of people who spoke to him only about his appearance, or his progress. Letters from his parents went unanswered. When he asked Serapha to send word to them, she lowered her gaze. His Majesty says such ties will only distract you from your new station. But they're my family, Lucan pressed. Her tone softened, but her words were unyielding. You have a new family now, the Emperor himself. The instruction sessions grew longer and stranger. One morning, a voice tutor arrived to correct the timbre of his speech. Less force in the consonants, she said, tilting his chin upward. Soften your tone. Let the words glide rather than strike. In the afternoons, Serapha drilled him in graceful movement. Your steps must flow, not march, she chided, adjusting his hips. The Emperor dislikes sharp angles. Think of the wind moving through silk. At first, Lucan resisted. He walked stiffly, deliberately deepened his voice when speaking, and refused the cold pencils brought to darken his lashes. But Cassian's patience had limits. One evening, the Emperor entered during a lesson. Lucan, frustrated, muttered something under his breath. Cassian's eyes chilled. Do you think this is optional? He asked quietly. Lucan met his gaze. I think I'm not a doll for you to dress up. Cassian stepped closer, his voice low but dangerous. You are whatever I decide you are. And if you force me to decide harshly, you will regret it. The following day, Lucan's lessons doubled. Guards now accompanied him from chamber to chamber, and the bronze mirror in his room was replaced with one of polished silver, large enough to show every detail of the changes creeping across his face. Section 8. The Final Reflection. Winter's breath swept over Aurelia, but Lucan no longer felt the seasons. Time inside the eastern wing was measured in fittings, in lessons, in the slow erosion of the self he had once known. The transformations had moved beyond clothing and manner. Herbal poultices were applied nightly to pale his skin. His eyebrows were shaped with meticulous care. Tiny jeweled pins kept his hair trained in soft waves that brushed his shoulders. The first time Cassian brought him to the marble chamber where Valeria's embalmed body rested, Lucan understood the depth of the madness. The room glowed with lamplight, gold and shadow dancing over the silken-wrapped figure on the bier. She looked serene, untouched by decay, her hands folded over her chest. Cassian stood beside her like a penitent before an altar. "You see it now," the Emperor whispered. "The truth. You were always meant to be her continuation." Lucan's chest tightened. "I am not her," he said, though the words felt smaller than they should have. Cassian turned to him, his gaze hungry and desperate. "Not yet. But soon." In the weeks that followed, the resemblance became uncanny. Servants began to avert their eyes when Lucan passed. It was as if they feared to look upon the dead returned. Cassian, meanwhile, grew calmer, almost tender, calling him by Valeria's name in private. One night, standing before the great silver mirror, Lucan stared at the reflection that stared back, a stranger's face, and yet, somewhere deep in the eyes, the last flicker of himself. The next morning, when Serapha arrived for the day's lessons, the chambers were empty. The window's lock had been forced, the curtains fluttering in the dawn breeze. Far below, on the outer wall of the palace, a single gold-threaded bell dangled in the wind, caught on the stone. Whether Lucan escaped the city, or whether the Emperor's guards found him before sunrise, no one dared to say. But in the years that followed, rumors spread of a figure glimpsed in distant ports, green-gold eyes watching from the crowd. Forever walking the line between who he was and who he had been forced to become. And in Aurelia, the Emperor still kept two shrines, one for the woman he had loved, and one for the ghost he had created.